an analysis of the global, European, and even French economy with an expert of all people, the chief economist of the ALLIANZ group, Ludovic SUBRAN. Thanks for being with us today. Well, after the European elections, before the US elections, that's what we expected to say, but before the French general election, what can we say about the health of the global economy? And then we'll zoom in on the French economy. It seems essential today. All right, you have the floor. Well, hello again. Indeed, when we prepared, we started thinking about it a year ago. In the meantime, there's been a lot of crap going on. So on the 9th of June, I was happy. I was thinking, well, the EU election didn't go so badly compared to the Germans. And then at 9 p.m., the president decided to do stupid things, and I have to talk about it because that will have an impact on your industry, but I'm saving that for last so that you're forced to listen to me. So my message is fivefold in 25 to 30 minutes. The first message was that we knew that it was going to be a big election year. We didn't know how much. We didn't expect Rishi Sunak or Macron. They wanted to spend an easy holiday on their yachts. So, of course, I'll have to use boating metaphors. But anyway, on the 4th of July, 7th of July, interesting things are going to happen. But we knew that 60% of the global population would vote this year. There were very important elections like those in Russia, or in Taiwan, Indonesia, in India. But really, all eyes were on the US elections. I have to talk about these elections because they will take place in November, and they're very important because President Trump has a big chance of being elected again. And you have to understand a couple of things about that. First, Trump, if elected again, is expecting great and very nice things. He'll solve the Ukraine war in 24 hours, so that's nice. But we don't really know how he's going to fix that, and so we may end up with big tensions in Europe between Meloni saying bravo, bravo, and Macron, or his next prime minister, who will have to find funding for the Ukraine war because we thought that we would continue because that would be nice for the Ukrainians. That's a big stumbling block because there will be fragmentation in Europe. Growing fragmentation, because you'll understand that what happens in France will have a cumulative risk on this fragmentation risk. So we need to know what will happen if Trump is back. Another very strong fault line with Trump, ESG, as you know, most of his electors don't believe in climate change, so he will make zero efforts on the climate. Third fault line, the Chinese-American war. He's really gung-ho. He wants to have 30% trade barriers on products imported from China, 10% for everybody else. So we will be hit also. And you know that Trump is not a very big fan of Taiwan. He doesn't understand the difference between Taiwan and Thailand. That's true. Everything I'm saying is true. Google it. Now, so the question, what would you do if China invades Taiwan? The answer from Trump, I don't like Thais from Thailand, not Taiwanese, because they steal our jobs because of their semiconductors. So since 1994, there's been strategic ambiguity saying that if China invaded Taiwan, US would fly to their rescue. Well, it's more ambiguous now. So it's a rough estimate, but what's behind Trump's election is inflation. If Trump's back, what you need to understand is that if you add all of his announcements, so protectionism, trade barriers, deportation, that's what he's calling, deportation of 7.7 million US immigrants, and obvious discredits on the Fed for years, there will be a big inflationary shock. And I'll gloss over what I think will be part of his policy. So a negative tax shock, as he did in 2016, taking hundreds of billions from the IRA, front-load it, and dump that on the economy. So very inflationary. But the Fed hasn't cut rates yet, so they may end up with a meeting 3 days after the November election, and they would be caught in quite a pickle. We're still talking about a US rate cut, But if Trump's back in 2025, the Fed may not cut its rates because of the inflationary shock. The risk is that in March 2026, when Powell leaves, Eva Cantrell may become Fed chairman, and that's a tail risk. It's not the central risk, but you need to understand that. It's not just Trump's back. It's a bit like before. The world has changed. In 2020, the world stopped. You knew that to avoid recession, failures, and unemployment. We put a lot of money in the economy, and so more public debt and inflation. If Trump's back, more public debt and inflation, there's divergence between the US and Trump back. Like a bull in a china shop, there will be even more decoupling between the US and the EU. And so if Bardella from the National Rally becomes Prime Minister in France, we may not be able to cut rates also in the ECB. There's a big tension on the euro-dollar, on the markets. If you have a bit of money, of course, you'll go to the US to invest that. It's the same with Mélenchon. The risk of capital flight is very high between the US and the EU. It's important to understand it because to fund our sector, we remember 2012. Now we have a central bank that's serious. But it's very important to understand that Trump is not fully anecdotal for the global economy, especially for the European economy, because of the political and geopolitical impact, but especially the economic impact, and that will end badly very often. If Trump's back, the recession risk in the US will increase because there will be monetary overcorrection. So the financing conditions will be very bad. If Biden stays, it's not great, but it will be slightly better. It's not going to be great because he's planned a tax shock. If Biden's back, the US tax rate will increase because there's a 6% deficit with 4% growth in the US. And with the Congressional Budget Office forecast, the debt over GDP in the US will be 180% in 2030. When asked why does the US have so much growth and so little in the EU, I can explain. 1/3 is public deficit, 1/3 is immigration, 1/3 is the technological and energy edge, because now they are a net exporter of energy. Now we know why. Do we want to have so much deficit? Maybe not. It's not working the same way because in Germany, they're against debt. In France and Italy, we sort of squandered money, but there are also population policy and technological policy issues. That's a reason why US companies, that's the difference between 2020 and now between the US and the EU. They also had inflation, but there was no investment cycle in the EU as they did in the US. You need to understand that. If you look at all the investment cycle figures, inflation and pricing power by US firms very often resulted in reinvestment. Inflation and pricing power by EU companies resulted in higher margins. And that's a big difference between the US and the EU. Second issue, economic normalization. Economic normalization is very much advanced. Of course, there's still a bit of inflation, but much less than 18 months ago, and no reason why we should still have record inflation. Is 3% the new 2%? Maybe, but not necessarily for the reasons you expect. This not due to monetary policy or what the Fed or ECB are doing. As you know, in your sectors, there are oligopolies and firms that work with a lot of pricing power. So if you look at the causes of inflation in Europe and the US, there are non-monetary causes, especially supply shocks and supply risks. I'll dwell on that because this is of particular interest to you. One of the reasons why Europe is in particular difficulty versus the US, when we have a supply shock, very often the shock is 30% higher for us than the Americans. If there's a problem in the Red Sea or in an international trade infrastructure, Taiwan blockade for a few weeks, very often the shock is 30% bigger for us. So that's what's complicated. Of course, we can do monetary policy better, but we need to look at other public policy, jobs policy, infrastructure, trade policy, competition policy. This is where the future of inflation normalization will happen. So we'll probably be below 3% in an area where prices are a bit more volatile than before. But the good news is that with two crises that usually happen every 70 to 100 years, the economy is not doing that badly. And that's difficult to hear now, but there was no recession. That's the first time we've had such a big rate hike that didn't result in a recession or a financial crisis. That doesn't mean it won't happen, but it was rather well managed. We know that for fiscal policy reasons, for choices made in 2020 to massively redistribute to firms to not break the job market. Second thing we know about the economic normalization, the credit risk, that's important. There was no surge in bankruptcies. There was a normalization, but not a wave of bankruptcies we could have expected, and that's due to the economic policy choices made in 2020 in all countries. So firm subsidies to avoid them going bankrupt more quickly, but since then there were very costly measures to keep companies alive. We know the energy shield in France, that was very costly. That's also why we had 100 billion adjustment expected in France. That's a huge amount because our economic support measures were more radical than others to keep relatively low energy and power prices to avoid that people would be back barbecuing on roundabouts as they did during the yellow vest crisis. But look at companies' balance sheets in France and abroad. They have cash. Margins are quite good. They need to keep them up. And the big issue in 2024 is revenue decline. There was a big deceleration in revenues because of the price effect, but also because of volume effects. In some countries, there are a lot of savings, like France or Germany. Some countries, not so much, the US. But overall, there's a lot of precautionary savings. People are afraid of the real estate crisis, so there's a negative wealth effect. They're afraid of their house being worth less, so they're saving more, and they understand that social protection would become more costly. So they're all building a nest egg, and that has a detrimental impact on revenues for companies. There are few sectors that will avoid a deceleration in revenue growth that's been seen for the last 12 months. But my second message is that the normalization is happening not so badly. That's rather good news. It's holding up. It's resilient. I'll talk about the French election, but whatever the scenarios we might define now, the good news is that there's some resilience in the economy, and there are reasons for that. The central banks or the net financial position of economic agents, it's quite good. I didn't expect it to be so well managed if you look at the doldrums of 2020 and 2022 again. Third topic, the climate, which is huge for your sector. That's not talked about at all in the election campaign. Why? Because there's climate populism. If you're in the extremes, you're using the climate where it's useful. Right now, we're not talking about the climate in the European election. There was very little talk about it when it's a big issue. There are major choices to make. Well, it's a second round impact, especially with EVs. Maybe not so much, especially when it's about defining what we're going to do with fossil fuel subsidies. But I really believe that there will be a big issue there. We calculated that for shipping, more precisely, rather than marine insurance, you need to invest 7 years of profits to be on track for the low carbon trajectory for shipping. That's a lot, 7 years of profits for a whole business sector. Europeans may be better positioned than others, but the Chinese are investing on methanol. Other fleets are better, but there's a big issue how to reinvest this money, because now the ROI is not good. We know that money is given to shareholders. There are no economic incentives for the ROI of one major investment in the economic transition to be lucrative for everybody, shareholders, clients, and so on and so forth. So there's a form of major sclerosis on the energy transition, be it for adaptation, the money we need to put in place to avoid being impacted by natural disasters that will be more frequent and severe. Usually that's not very costly, but especially mitigation. These are the 3 GDP points every year so that we can have CO2 emissions that will have been halved by 2050. That's what mitigation is about. In every sector, there are plans. Europe has the Fit for 55 plan. That's not bad. But as you can see in the EU election, this is where it's all happening as well. Since there's a political force that has emerged, buoyed by Giorgia Meloni in Italy, maybe the Green Deal could be diluted a little bit. Well, if there's rather a majority with the Socialist Party, the SCD, then that should strengthen the Green Deal, because we have a triangle of incompatibility in every sector. That's clear for cars. You can have cheap cars or road hauliers emissions or competition. It's hard to reconcile everything. Same for energy, security of supply, cost of energy, and of course issues of competitiveness or European single market. Even Jordan Bardella, he's been in the European Parliament for 5 years, he still doesn't get it. Well, he doesn't get anything about pensions, nationalization of highways in France. I'd be worried about nationalization of ships. Thinking about there's no corporate tax or a tonnage tax, but I mean, he'll have forgotten tomorrow. He's got sort of goldfish memory. Well, he looks very good. He's very fit, very buff, but it seems to be in inverse proportion to his synapses. Anyway. Well, I mean, this is not the US, but of course I'll have to shoot some bullets, get some bullets off. I mean, you'll love it. Ovation, please. Yes, thank you.
Donc, ceux qui n'ont pas...
So it means that those of you who didn't applaud vote for Rassemblement National. We all know someone who does. So going back to my climate incompatibility triangle. So as you will have understood, I think that this is a very important topic, because as an insurer, I can see the cost of adaptation, and I think that maybe we could focus more on prevention. And there's a very strong business opportunity as well in terms of mitigation. In the US, they invested $500 billion in transition when they don't actually care a lot about it. But despite this, they do not believe in sobriety. And despite this, they still invested $500 billion. So it means that there's some business opportunity related to the green economy. And we need to make sure that not all of our PhD students leave for the US because there are more opportunities in Boston than in Paris. So that's a very important topic. The fourth topic I wanted to discuss is that of global trade, because this is a topic that is very important to you. I do not believe in deglobalization. I do not really understand what people mean when they talk about it. When people say global trade is slowing down, and when you ask them what kind of metrics they are using, they are looking at the share of imports in GDP. But if this is the metric you use to measure globalization, it means that you did not really study economics, because in your third year of economic studies at university, you start working on the structure of the economy and on the added value of some products. So here we're talking about economies that grow a lot, and that despite a limited trade can generate growth. And this is what we call growth of productivity because of the tertiary sector, etc. And when we look at the productivity gain in the US with the AI, and this has an impact on the salaries, on demand, and on experience consumption as well. Americans now prefer going on vacations rather than going to work. Well, that's a different approach. And you will have noticed that there are a lot of Americans in Paris right now. So this is not something that you see in the trade balance, but rather in the payment balance or in other flows. So movement of people or of information. So I think that we need to stop talking about deglobalization. When we look at the protectionist measures that have been taken over the past 12 months, that have grown by 38% compared with the previous year. So it means that there's an economic fragmentation, And to that, we need to add a financial fragmentation. Since the Ukraine war, we've understood that we can apply sanction to a country and still import their gas, because we're still importing 10% of our gas from Russia. And so that's a very important point to understand, because we are moving towards a world where we will control capital more. So there will be some frictions in terms of trade with tariff measures, and Trump is a very good example of that. And this will have an impact also on the payment balance as well. And it doesn't mean that we are moving towards deglobalization, but it just means that some things are becoming more difficult to manage. And this is where you intervene, because your service should cost less if you are working in logistics, if you are a carrier of goods. You have a very bright future in this world. But I think that we are going back to the situation we had in the 1970s, when we had a world that was opening up. This was before the coming of age of China. And at that time, there were a lot of frictions, a lot of tensions at the time. And so Trump is actually going back to the 1970s in terms of tariffs. And here we're talking about other types of trade barriers, for instance, with some acts of state, etc. And if you are from Cambodia or Malaysia, you will not turn to the same countries. And same thing in Africa. It's a bit about 50 shades of the global south, but it's important to keep that in mind. And so everyone wants to go to India now. It's quite fashionable. So we're talking about 1.6 billion people. But it is one of the most protectionist countries in the world. And out of the 60 euros spent by an Indian household, only 2 euros are imported. So not everyone can make money in India. And many companies tried to be present in India, including some subsidiaries from ALLIANZ, but it does not always work. And I think that this is what is fascinating and how this applies to you. I have very little time left, so now I would like to talk about the French election. So you are all free to have your own opinion, but I would like to share mine. Yes. On the 8th of June, so I'm a member of the Economic Analysis Committee with the Prime Minister. And I haven't met with him yet. They do not listen to economists a lot. So we needed to find 112 billion euros. This is what was part of our stability pact with Europe. And so we wanted to have a 3% deficit by 2027, because Macron was reaching the end of his term. And so you cannot have an adjustment for 111 billion euros in just 3 years. And the last time we did that was with François Hollande, and it led to 0% growth. So François Hollande had decided to do that with 2/3 through taxes and 1/3 through cutting costs, which was not the most clever thing to do. It's just an economic judgment. So we knew that, and before that, we also knew that Macron had done some things well. He had brought unemployment down, he had handled crisis, and he had worked a lot on to increase attractivity. And to develop industrial jobs and for the voice of France in Europe, because we were probably the last ones to make suggestions because Germany is in a at a stalemate, same thing in Italy, and so we could make the list of all EU members the same way. There are some interesting things happening in Belgium and in Greece, but the French-German couple was not working because of the coalition that we have right now in Germany. So Macron did some things, and some things remain to be done. And the vote, the election on the 8th of June, was a vote of class. And I can assure you that the municipalities that voted the most for the far-right party, Rassemblement National, are the municipalities that have the bigger distance to a hospital, and where purchasing power hasn't improved. So it is really a vote that is related to the economic class, and so Marine Le Pen is very different from her father. So I can the program from Rassemblement National was 130 billion euros with the reform of the electricity market, bringing down VAT, and also going back to the Retirement Act. And all of these measures were removed from their program over the past week. And we know this is not how things are done. It's not because they are not prepared that they are not going to make mistakes. And all governments make economic mistakes. To the left, we can see that the budget is quite similar, with 130 billion, but they are going to raise taxes. And this will generate some concerns similar to what we saw in 1981. And this is how people you liked 5 minutes ago end up telling you that they will vote for Rassemblement National. And then you're wondering what happened to them. Because we've all experienced it. Because there are also some Renaissance candidates as well. Well, it's because they have the same concerns as people had in 1981. So if we look at the budgets, at jobs projections, if we look at growth strategies, well, I still think, as I explained in a recent interview, and I'm not an expert in political sciences, so maybe I'm trying to convince myself, but I think that we will end up with a very fragmented parliament. And it means, from an economic point of view, that we'll have what we call a technocratic government in France. And I had to talk to two experts in French constitution to see how we could work, how the parliament could work without any party having a majority, because it's unprecedented. So you can have a draft budget. So this is what Obama had, and what Belgium also had for a while. So you can manage the country's budget based on cash. So you can appoint someone to manage the Olympics. And Macron invested so much money in the Olympics, and he's just took a decision that led to a major mess just a few weeks prior to the Olympics. And I don't know how it would work without any party having a majority. I can understand how it would work with the budget, but not for the other things. Because for some reforms, you need to have a group in Parliament that will propose that bills, and I do not understand how it would work in tangible terms. So I'm waiting to see how it would work. So we have three possibilities in terms of majority. With Renaissance, it would be similar to what we have right now. And so 120 billion regarding the cost of programs. And the rest, 120 and 100 in public revenue. And Renaissance, so do you know how much Gabriel Attal is spending? 7 billion. Because he thought with the drop in mutation rights, we could solve all of the issues we have in France. And that's the problem. So I think that they were not up to the challenge with this election. So they're just adding a bit of magic, and they're thinking that it's going to work. It's 7 years of pro-business reforms. And so Rassemblement National, they have a lot of problems in terms of economic credibility, more so than to the left. And we run the risk of having a major, so having a lot of capital fleeing the country, and then this could be similar to Brexit. So I don't know what else I could say about this. So please do not forget to vote on the 30th of June and the 7th of July. And taxes will most certainly go up. So that's the first takeaway. Secondly, we can be thankful for the ECB because otherwise I think that our political and economic certainty would cost us a lot more money because the fact that our ECB is very strong, well, this is playing a big role in terms of creditors' patience in face of the French mess. And third takeaway, there's no upside. So whatever who wins, it doesn't matter who wins. There's no upside, and the good news is that we will know quite quickly what is going to happen. And the bad news is I do not think that this would lead us anywhere. So I hope our European neighbors will be patient with us. Same thing for the ECB and for Trump. And this is why I was talking about the Trump risk in my introduction. So on the 8th of July, I will be on holidays. It's not going to be life-changing for me. I know it sounds quite sad, but that's a reality. However, on the 6th of November, I will be a lot more concerned because in July, we'll be focusing on the Olympics, and we'll be looking at who's sitting next to our French president. However, the main milestone this year will be in November, and we'll be maybe more concerned with the patience of our neighboring countries and what's going to happen in the US. So this is what we need to monitor right now. So we need to look at the growth outlooks in Europe as well. So I did not share many good news, a lot of good news today, but long live the maritime cluster. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Ludovic.
Thank you so much, Ludovic. So we will probably have some additional questions, but I'm the timekeeper here. But what about the previous speakers? I think they went over time by 5 minutes. No, I don't think so. Well, thank you very much. So we'll try and enjoy the summer. This is the main takeaway from your intervention. So we're going to watch a short video, and after that, I will give the floor to Lola Ovarles, my colleague from L'Opinion. And we'll have a roundtable in English on the transportation of electric vehicles and lithium-ion batteries. So if you need interpretation into French, you can grab a headset near the entrance.